Okay, that's fine.
We need to properly situate the conversation on the growth of the economy in the proper context. And if you look at our budget statements and the economic policy of the government of Ghana for the 2025 financial year, paragraph 208 talks about the overall GDP growth. And it is stated there, according to the finance minister, that Mr. Speaker, provisional 2024 GDP statistics published by the Ghana Statistical Service yesterday, 10th March, indicates that overall real GDP grew by 5.7% in 2024, compared with the 3.1% growth in 2023. The key drivers of this growth were largely, one, information and communication, construction, and mining and quarrying, which recorded growth rates of 15.8%, 9.6%, and 9.4% respectively. And so the finance minister alluded to three key sectors, or three things that were the drivers of the 5.7 growth rate of the GDP that we saw. Now, the finance minister is not wrong in saying that the growth rate can be attributed or is attributable to Galamsey. Because when you talk about the three key sectors that were mentioned, mining is part. And in this mining, we're made to understand that a chunk of the gold that was produced, a chunk of the gold that we exported to the global market came from Galamsey or small-scale mining. Again, the evidence of illegal mining was obvious, palpable for everybody to see in 2024 when we saw the massive destruction to our forests and destruction to our water bodies. To the extent that even the Ghana Water Company in 2024 predicted that if the trend continued as it were in 2024, by 2030, we will be importing water before we could drink. And so we all accept the fact that in the mining sector, we have a big issue with Galamsey. And so if anyone says the growth rate was supported or is attributable to the growth rate of 9.6%, which is above the average of the 5.7 in the mining sector, which is Galamsey, the person is not wrong or may not be wrong in the analysis. But you see, I want us to begin this conversation of growth rate from a certain angle, because in Parliament yesterday, speaker after speaker from the minority side kept referring to growth rate as evidence that they did well or the economy was performing well. But you see, GDP growth rate is not an indicator. It's not an indicator of a well-managed economy. It's not. I'm saying this because there are several things that goes into the computation of the GDP. So yes, every country will celebrate GDP growth because it shows that the economy is expanding. Is that not it? But to use it only, as the indicator. So it is not the only indicator that the economy is doing well. GDP growth cannot be the only indicator. So let me give you an example. They refer to the 2016 GDP growth figures and said that we left the economy at 3.6%, 3.4%, and that in 2017 the economy grew by 7.8 or almost 8%. And so that shows that they took the economy from 3.4% to 7.8%. And so that we should credit them for the growth. But you see, in November 2016, the Economic Intelligence Unit, the EIU, in their prediction of Ghana's elections in 2016, predicted rightly that the NDC, the then President Mahama government, was going to lose the elections. And they also predicted that regardless of whoever wins the elections, Ghana's economy or the GDP will grow by on the average 8% because of the investment being made into the economy, especially in the oil sector. So when you look at the 2017 growth rate of 7.8, you realize that the growth actually came from the oil sector because of the investment that President Mahama and the NDC made in that sector by the addition of 2 new oil fields. And so from 90,000 barrels of oil a day on the average, we were doing close to 200,000 barrels because of the 10 fields and the Sankofa fields. And so that spiraled the growth to the 7.8. So I tell people that even if any other party, any other person had won the elections, it was still possible to have that 7.8% growth, because when you check it, industry, agri, manufacturing, services sector, they did not record any significant growth. But the growth came from a close to 46% growth rate in the oil sector. And so the non-oil GDP growth, well, they were actually negative. But with the oil sector coming, because you are calculating average, and so when you add the oil sector, we could record the 7.8% growth. And so that is where the foundation started from. So even when you are making a comparison of the two economies, we left for you an economy that at the time we were living, or what we inherited, had only 1 oil field. We were getting on the average 90,000, sometimes 70,000 barrels. But we left for you an additional 2 oil fields that increased the oil sector growth, because you were now getting close to 200,000 barrels in a day from the oil sector. Now, all the way from 2017 back to 5.7 in 2024. Why are we so fixated on celebrating the percentage of GDP growth when, from all indications, that growth has not translated into proportional gains in the quality of life of the Ghanaian people? For example, employment. At the time you were celebrating 5.7% growth as your achievement because GDP grew by 5.7%, close to 2 million Ghanaians. In fact, the Ghana Statistical Service put it at 1.85 million Ghanaian youth were in what we call the needs bracket. No education, no employment, no training. And so, close to 2 million Ghanaian youth were idling around. Now, economic growth ought to translate in the growth of the industry so that unemployment rate will decrease.
You're suggesting that growth is not an end in itself.
No, it's
only a means to a certain end.
Yeah, it's a certain means. Now, depending on where the growth comes from, we can analyze whether or not it translates into the quality of life of the people. Now, because the growth is largely attributable to the extractive sector, whether oil or mining, it did not translate into the quality of life of the people. That is why, despite that 5.7% growth, you will agree with me that unemployment rate, you met unemployment rate at 8% when President Mahama was exiting office. But you left it at 14.7%. And so if you were really growing and there was proper expansion in the economy, it should have translated into getting more Ghanaians employed. And so put that aside. Again, this growth rate also exposed our country as very vulnerable to the income inequality gap that is of concern to many people. Because at the same time you want us to celebrate the 5.7% growth, 800,000 Ghanaians were pushed below the poverty line. And that is according to a World Bank report. A World Bank report on upset in inflation. And they attribute it to the fact that inflation, which became so high under your tenure, that inflation has pushed over 800,000 Ghanaians, 850,000 Ghanaians actually, under or below the poverty line. So now if you celebrate growth, GDP growth, just in terms of the percentage, without looking at how that affects or impacts the average Ghanaian, you may be missing a key point. Because as for GDP, we are talking about gross domestic product. It can mean that today, Boro, if some investors or you have some expatriates, they decide to come and invest in this country, maybe they choose to invest in our oil, choose to invest in our gold, they may come with very few workers and use heavy machinery, invest in those sectors, add up to our production and increase or shoot our GDP growth up. But in effect, it will not.
41 minutes.
It will, but in effect.
Sorry?
You mean what?
41 minutes.
I've spoken for 41 minutes.
No, that's not true.
I'm just prompting him.
That what?
8:41 started at 8.
No, that's not true. Please go ahead.
We didn't start at 8.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I know when we started.
I keep the time, so don't worry.
8:41,
I keep the
so-
time.
I know he keeps the
I'm
time,
monitoring.
Reverend.
Please go ahead.
So, at the end of the day, we're talking about growth rates, and you want us to celebrate your government for 5.7% growth rate, without telling us how that growth has translated into improving the quality of life of them. And I've given you some indications. In terms of employment rate,
Yes.
it had no impact. In terms of even inflation, in terms of people above or pushing people above the poverty line, it rather pushed 850,000 people more below the poverty line. So we are saying that for this year, President Mahama and the Finance Ministry are projecting growth rate of 4%. Then you tell us that how can a reset economy project growth rate of 4% when what we inherited was 5.7%? We are projecting growth rate of 4% because we do not only believe in recording figures, statistics that makes no meaning to the ordinary Ghanaian, but that statistics must correspond, must align with the quality of life of the people. And so we believe in investing in production. And so when you look at all our economic policies, bold interventions, bold solutions, as we announced in the budget statement and as President Mahama announced in the State of the Nation address, these are policies that will translate in proper growth that inures to the benefit of the Ghanaian people. For example, they make mockery of Akukon Kitinkiti. As we speak today, governments or Ghana as a country, we are importing over $300 million worth of chicken. Now, when you grow what you eat and you eat what you grow, what you are essentially doing is that your forex will see improvement because you are not importing more, but you are rather consuming what you are producing and then you import less. So that $300 million worth of chicken products that are imported into this country will see significant reduction. Why? Because the policy you mock, which is the Akukon Kiti, will help 55,000 households to now venture into the production of chicken locally. Okay. Now, when they do that, it creates employment because I have visited a number of poultry farms, even in my constituency. You rarely or hardly see a poultry farm that employs, even the very small ones. They don't employ 2 or 3. Some employ 5, 6. So imagine these big ones coming to add up. So you are creating sustainable employment. Again, you are also reducing your import cover. Same for agriculture. So agriculture for economic transformation. And all the other policies, 24-hour economy, the big push, which will help with infrastructure. We are making investment into the real productive sectors of the economy. And that is how you grow. And so it is not just about competing with you over economic figures. If we decide to allow party functionaries, to allow party foot soldiers, and people take advantage of the forest, our river water bodies, and decide to also engage in Galamsey, it is likely you will see some rise in the quantum of gold that we produce as a country annually.
Okay.
But we are interested in a more sustainable way of approaching this, and that is why on daily basis, when you follow the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, and I must say the Honorable Amakofi-Boa is doing an excellent job. We so far have recovered or taken over some forests that illegal miners took over years ago.
You reclaimed.
We reclaimed them. Recently, they launched a program to put 400 young people as guards to help. So they will work as whistleblowers, help the security agencies to ensure that the issue of Galamsey in our water bodies is stopped.